we're going to talk about our experience working with startups to enterprise clients and a lot of the mistakes that we have seen them make in the world of either migrating to or using HubSpot as a CRM to grow their business. And that can come from sales, that can come from marketing, customer service, and now soon to include commerce, correct?
Yeah, commerce is kind of like it's their sixth hub, but it's a blend of some features that they had built in that's kind of baked under sales. HubSpot really doesn't do physical commerce. It's more like digital commerce. So you can take payments, but that's a separate topic.
I see like a Wall Street analyst like peeping through like, see, I told you, revenue expansion opportunities.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. Go purchase Shopify. Right.
They had released these a variety of the features and they were in beta. And then they came out with a release and like what's coming out of the platform. I think it was like 4 to 6 weeks back. And they're like new hub, commerce hub, and I'm like, oh, so the features that were already there, you just packaged them up and said commerce hub.
Yeah,
yeah.
Well, a lot of my work with HubSpot has been more like the data model, data architecture, reporting, usage. Really helping uncover the insights as to what in their process, clients' processes are or are not working. That's a lot of my background and experience. So I've seen a lot of things in terms of issues and mistakes that come either with poor planning and poor configuration from the start or with management of processes over time. I definitely got some horror stories and things to talk about on that front. But what's a lot of your focus at 3V working with HubSpot?
So I'll add clients at the end of that question with HubSpot clients. So you're using HubSpot's a CRM. At its core, it's a CRM, and then your marketing, sales, customer success, customer service teams are going to be all using that same data and that data model that's in the CRM. So the actionability that you're able to take from like a revenue operations standpoint, which is your customer service, your sales, and your marketing teams working in unison to generate and protect revenue, your processes represent how all three of those teams or subsets of those teams are supposed to be operating. And so what I largely see is a lack of preparation leads to a lack of execution. And the preparation comes in the form of discovering, understanding, documenting, implementing, and testing your processes for sales, marketing, and customer success.
Which makes a lot of sense because a lot of the things that I have found has been on the documentation, implementation, and evolution and management of that over time.
Yes. Like point me to a flow chart that represents your sales process. Oh, yeah. Well, you got to talk to Dan, right? Well, who's Dan? Well, Dan's the guy that uses sales the most.
And then Dan leaves in 2 weeks.
Yeah.
So go get what you can from him. And by the way, that's a real story, excluding the name Dan.
Yeah.
My experience has definitely been, I have not come across sort of like the holy grail of a HubSpot install, working with clients or helping them solve some of their most important data problems. But what I have seen more mature management in some client cases versus others. And the question I have for you is, what sort of sets up a client for success when they either migrate to HubSpot or they just start implementing HubSpot? What really gives them the foundation that they need to be able to really manage it effectively themselves over time?
That's a great question. I think that you need to have like a platform expert and a product owner. And if you don't have those two people, you're largely going to see failures in data and process. The platform expert is going to be the person that's going to know how HubSpot works underneath the hood. So when you're wanting to do anything new or set up or incorporate new features or define your business processes within inside of HubSpot, largely this person is going to help you understand how you can do that. Then you have your people that are using the system every day. Those people are important because they're the ones that are driving like how it needs to work, but ultimately they're the end user. And so having a platform expert and then the users of HubSpot, having them be working together is really the most important part. And a lot of times you'll see gaps in the alignment. Like there might not be a HubSpot expert who can help the HubSpot users. So then the HubSpot users are going and saying, well, I need to do my job. they don't know a ton about HubSpot. They're just going to be using it. And then they're going in there and they're trying to configure things and they're setting stuff up and they get something to a working state. But because they're not a platform expert, they have not accounted for what those configurations mean at scale. And that's usually where we see people come back to us. We set up HubSpot a year or two ago and like we just kind of turned it loose and now we got this mess. Well, really what it comes down to is an expert of the platform is an expert of how the platform works and how your business processes should be implemented. And the platform users, they're there to make sure that your data is good. But the platform users, they're the ones who are getting value out of the system by using the CRM data. If they're not understanding how to govern that data, then largely you see drift in what is the requirements that organization has around its data or its processes over time. And then that's usually where audits come into play.
That hits home way too close. There was a client of ours who got acquired by a public company, and part of them getting acquired by a public company was us being able to complete some work for them and improve a lot of their inefficiency with their data that was stemming from their Adobe Analytics install, stemming from their data warehouse, as well as HubSpot. And I remember I vividly remember having to deal with some turnover where the platform expert had left, another platform expert had stepped in, and there wasn't really a good handoff or really any documentation. And then there was also turnover in the platform users.
Yep.
For both Marketing Hub and Sales Hub. And there really wasn't a general sort of guidance or understanding or principles. And what would happen is sales would make a request and it would break something in like lead scoring, or it would break something in a sales process, or marketing would make a request and then it would break something downstream in sales, because really marketing is upstream from sales, right? Because you at the top of the funnel, you need to get leads into the system, and then the leads actually at some point get scored, sent out to sales, etc.
And everyone's using the same data. So if sales is manipulating the data model and not accounting for the marketing and the customer success needs, then this is where you see a lot of inconsistencies in the data model.
Right, because the platform has access to an active database. It's not sort of
the CRM, yes.
Yeah, it's not like a data warehouse, so to speak, where it's just got a series of everything that's ever happened and it's easily streamlined and reportable. That's not how it works. Getting back to your point, though, about the biggest issue that I found in that case was turnover and not having a sort of a knowledge center or a centralized place where you could basically do two things. You could say, we have turnover, somebody won the lottery and they no longer need to work.
I'm glad you switched your reference to
that. Yeah. Not somebody died.
Yeah.
Thank goodness.
Small backstory if you ever want to, tell why it's important to document your processes. Don't use if somebody dies, how are you going to know? You say, if that person wins the lottery and they just are like, I don't need to work anymore.
Because then you don't have to pick on somebody to die.
Yeah.
Yeah, I get it. It's a very good recommendation too, by the way, which is why I used it. That turnover, right? Somebody winning the lottery. If they had that central place where at least their processes were documented, they could have an ability to, should they have enough platform knowledge, at least be able to understand how the process for the business is supposed to work, and then make sure that is sort of functioning as designed inside of HubSpot. Even better, though, would be not only if you had all of your processes defined, but if you also had your architecture diagrams and documentation for how it was implemented in HubSpot, you would now have that source of truth, that center of knowledge, as well as a place to go and train team members and staff. So how do you guys, on the development and CRM teams here at 3 Ventures, how do you guys help clients solve that specific problem?
This really comes down to a few parts. It's process documentation that serves as a visual aid to how the system is supposed to be working independent of HubSpot. Because if you were just using HubSpot as your visual reference, somebody would have to know how HubSpot works. But if I put a flowchart in front of them, it's a lot easier for them to see everything in one spot. So that's one. Two is having a platform expert available to you, whether that's through a third party like us, 3 Ventures, or on staff, where they can help educate new staff on teams, on your sales, customer success, or marketing teams on how their usage of HubSpot has been set up. Now, this could be something like use HubSpot's built-in. It's not really an ERD, but it's their data model tool where they show you here's all the objects in your system, here's all your custom objects, here's how all these objects are associated with each other, and then you could click on one of the objects and view all the properties. Very good way to understand the structure of the data, the technical piece, because really behind every CRM, it's the data model. The data model is a representation of all the records and how those records are going to be set up and structured in the system. So knowing, like having an administrator who can say, hey, like the first thing I want you to do is read this flowchart or these sets of flowcharts. There might be some supporting additional documentation. We'll have you look at that. Then we'll show you HubSpot's data model tool so you can get a representation of what's in the system. And then like, let's use the example of if you're on a marketing team. You're probably going to need to know what's the life cycle stages for your contacts. What are all of the campaigns we have running? What are the lists that are associated with those campaigns, the assets that are associated with those campaigns, the workflows that are associated with those campaigns? So having a centralized place where you could either show them within the interface how to find that information, or if you have a tool like we have here at 3 Ventures that we built where we extract all this information into like easily digestible spreadsheets, you can see everything that is pertinent to your job. And then you could get an explanation of like, hey, these campaigns do these things. They have these very targeted goals. And you reference the flowchart and you say, and they feed this part of the process. So what you're doing is you're building understanding around the existing implementation and setting expectations for how that person on a specific team can know what's already inside of HubSpot for them to do their job, and then how would they supplement what's inside of HubSpot with, say, new marketing campaigns.
So the biggest rebuttal that I commonly hear to that, though, is a client needs to get HubSpot up and rolling in a very a short window of time. And so they don't have the ability to do all of that correctly. And let's be honest, most businesses don't take the time that is needed to successfully document, plan, think about, and launch a platform or a tool that they use. So the question that I have for you is, how have you combated that need of needing to get a sort of minimum viable product out in a working amount of time, in a reasonable amount of time, while still also ensuring that there's either some type of plan or phase-based rollout of that documentation and that knowledge internally?
That's a great question. So what I do is I balance my discovery. Discovery is how we understand what we need to build for you. I balance it across 2 specific segments. One is pre-sale. So before you actually engage with 3 Ventures, we'll spend so much time working with you on really building out a roadmap and a scope to associate that roadmap. And then what we do is we take those 2 things, we break them apart into phases. Each phase usually represents a project. And what we do is we align needs of the organization with the project phases. So we might say, hey, you guys are going to go into a 4-part project phase. At the end of the first project, which let's just say it takes 8 weeks, this is the key and strategic outcomes you can expect and the features and functionality that will be available to your marketing and sales teams. And then based off of other things we've asked you guys, because we like to ask very strategic questions. We're platform experts. We've done this for a lot of clients. We ask those questions. We sit on our hands. We let the client talk. Usually they'll talk for 5 to 10 minutes without us interrupting them. And we're just capturing. They tell us along the way, this is my ideal state, or this is the company's ideal state. This is where we're currently at. We ask some follow-ups like, why is this still a problem today? Why hasn't it been addressed? What's stopping you from doing this? And then they continue to unpack, and they might say, well, some person left the organization. We had to figure out what they need, what they were doing. And so that tells us, hey, there's a gap here between how their account's configured, and that would be in the case of like an existing account. Or they might say, hey, we don't have those processes defined, like if they're a new account. And so we know that we have to add some of that stuff in at the very beginning of the process. And then we use our findings to explain at the executive level. We must do things in succession to meet the objectives you're looking for per phase of each of the parts of the roadmap that are going to correlate to a project.
So you break it down into manageable chunks. You
Yep.
execute it that way instead of having to run out with this big bang sort of procedure and process.
Quality paraphrasing from
So-
Alan Morty.
Yeah, quality. How does sort of the options for onboarding vary though for HubSpot? Like, I'm familiar with some of the sides of it, but you're also familiar with the fact that HubSpot has its own onboarding services. And I think what, we've ran into with some SMBs in the past is the expectation of what you just pointed out does not align with the reality of what you get from HubSpot's onboarding services.
Yeah, so there's when you sign up with HubSpot, they're going to say, hey, you need to do your onboarding. And your three options are to work with a HubSpot partner, like 3 Ventures, shameless plug, or for you to say, hey, we're going to use HubSpot's onboarding service that they have, which I don't recommend to clients. Not that I'm a partner. I think that the partners do a much better job, and HubSpot knows it. That's why they've invested heavily in their partner ecosystem. And then the third part is for you to waive the onboarding and do it yourself. That works really great if you're a HubSpot platform expert. If you already know what you need to do, right, you can do it for the organization that you work at. But in most cases, they don't have that person on staff. If they did, they wouldn't be coming into us and needing help. So those are your 3 types of onboarding. What I traditionally see is if they go with HubSpot's onboarding, it gets them by for the first year, but they largely feel like they just help them turn the lights on in their HubSpot account. They didn't really help them paint the walls and put the furniture in and set the lighting right and make sure that the air conditioning is always at a certain temperature at a time of day and make sure that the door is out of lock and install the alarm system, right? They're just getting you on board for you to start. A partner is really investing the time to learn your business and then understanding your business processes and then implementing those inside of HubSpot. There are, in my opinion, 2 tiers of HubSpot partners. There are the marketing partners and there are the technical partners. There's no delineation in the HubSpot partner ecosystem for that, but when you are looking for a HubSpot partner, you will understand what I'm talking about because you'll talk to some that really know the platform in and out, and then you'll talk to others that just kind of speak to marketing process. And you want the technical piece because marketing is a subset of the whole technical piece.
So most of the enterprise accounts that I've been brought in to work on for HubSpot work and solving some of their toughest data challenges have all been from the fact that onboarding was never done correctly. Maybe they worked with their internal development team or they worked with a partner who, like you said, was not a technical partner and they were a marketing partner, realistically speaking. And so the question I have for you is, what do you really see as sort of the bridge for people who are on HubSpot, who use HubSpot's onboarding services? What's the bridge between where they're at, where basically the lights are just turned on, to getting to working with a technical partner? Is that an audit? Is that sort of an assessment? Like what is the bridge between those 2 onboarding services when you need to get to the next level of maturity?
I would say that if you're going with HubSpot's onboarding, usually what happens is within the first year or 2, you realize your install is not mature enough. You've played in the system enough to know where the pitfalls are, and you just largely recognize that whoever helped you do the onboarding didn't do a good job because they didn't learn your business. That correlates to you go and you find a HubSpot partner, you find somebody to work as an FTE at your org, and they're going to help you remediate your account. That's going to come largely in the form of an audit. And that audit's going to be pertinent to the account setup and configuration, which is going to be mostly your data model and then your implementation of your business processes within the various hubs that you're using. So that's where you start. And then the gap analysis is going to come from what you have versus what the partners discovered you need and what you've told them you need. and then they present a plan forward to help remediate the account or reconfigure the account.
Yeah. Makes a lot of sense.
Can I supplement some answers?
Absolutely not.
Okay. Ask away. What's the next question?
No, go ahead. Continue.
I know. I was just joking. Usually what I see a lot of and we see a lot of is data problems. Accounts that are in existence, the data gets messed up. That could be for a variety of reasons, but it usually, what is not understood is data governance is everyone's problem. When you go to marketing, marketing's like, oh, sales messed up the data. When you go to sales, sales goes, oh, marketing messed up the data. You talk to customer service, they're like, the data was messed up and we got it. And then who's ever integrating data into the HubSpot platform from your website or your apps or whatever, it's their job to manage the data too. It's everyone's job to manage the data. If there's something wrong, somebody needs to call foul and the team needs to address it. Well, that's the largest problem is the data model. And then hopefully your record data isn't really messed up. If you're having to clean up your record data and supplement your record data or fix your data because people were using fields inconsistently, that's where things get really messy and that's where the most time is spent. The other thing that we see is process development. Like the organization they don't have good controls or a good grasp on what the process needs to be. And the teams are all just working in different ways and they want a consistent, repeatable touch across their entire organization. Let's just say from a revenue operations perspective, because that encompasses all three teams, sales, marketing, customer success. For everybody to be working in a standardized fashion. And that also promotes a nice digital sounding board for anybody at the organization to go and look at the system and HubSpot the data in there and who's been doing what and who's been taking action. It's all recorded. So it's really a centralized source of truth for you to see where your sales teams are at, where your marketing teams are at, and what they've been doing and what your customer success teams have been doing. And so it gives you operational insight at any point in time, at any point in the day for you to make sure you know that people are or are not doing their jobs.
Now, my experience, to go back to that client project that we worked on for that large enterprise, ended up selling to a public company. The work that we did was basically a part of, it was a contingency of that sale, so we had to complete it. I always looked at sort of where do you get started either with implementation or where do you get started with remediation if you're doing an audit. And I always looked at it building off what you said as the three main data objects in HubSpot. You have contacts first and foremost, you have deals, and you have companies, right? Those are the three base.
That is your base data model,
Yep.
Yes.
And I always looked at it along the lines of if marketing has a problem, it's usually a contact problem. That's fundamentally what I've seen. If sales has a problem, it's usually a deal problem. And sometimes it can be a contact problem, depending on if lead scoring is done in a way where it scores leads or if lead scoring is done in a way where it automatically creates deals based off of what contacts are doing. So,
I would say that that's true for organizations who don't really understand the depth of their data model requirements. They just kind of use HubSpot's de facto data model out of the box, and really what it comes down to is really the associations between the contacts, the companies, and the deals in your case. And then, for those that are a little bit more mature, they're using custom objects inside of HubSpot, which are allowing them to bring in their own data model. And then through associations of those various different object types, what you're able to do is you're able to build a structure of your data to represent what the actual organization needs to see around its prospects and customers. And so if you're doing, you were speaking very specific to the individual, which is what HubSpot's made to work around, which is the contacts. But what happens if you want to take more of an account-based strategy, right? Well, your companies would represent those accounts, but you might have a variety of different types of information you would need to know, like your demographics could be on the company record, but how do you know if who are these specific points of contacts that are associated with that company that represent the right people you would need to talk to? Or in another case, like for custom objects, we have a client that is a franchise business. So they need to understand all of their franchises and then all of their office locations of those franchises, which they can have multiple. And then how do those correlate to the owners of those companies? Well, owners are contacts, but what about, leads? Leads are also contacts, right? So you can see how these associations between companies and custom objects and contacts, how you can build your own structure and setup there, but it's really going to be specific to your organizational needs, which is why I said around the maturity of your data. Because if you don't understand your business well enough, you can't build that out initially. But if you work with a HubSpot platform expert who does this from a variety of companies, they know they're going to learn your business first. Like it's your business first, HubSpot second. And they come in and they start to build understanding around what your data model needs actually are, even though you might not know it, right? They're asking you targeted questions. They're entrepreneurs themselves. They know the HubSpot platform. Boom, proposed data model. And then that's usually where we identify, to your point, existing HubSpot account. What's the gap between what you have and where we think you need to be? Or, hey, this is a new account. Let's say you're net new to HubSpot, like this is your data model you need. Then what we talk about, the next problem becomes like, how do we aggregate the data to put in that data model? Or the corollary is you're migrating from another platform, proposed data model change. Then how do we modify your records from that old system to work in the new data model of the new system?
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely a lot of in the weeds details for sure. I consider all of those to be extremely important. And especially when it comes into talking about testing and doing quality assurance on whatever it is that you have, either remediation from an audit or a first-time implementation. All of those are fundamentally important to understand. Every time I get in an account, the first thing that I do, assuming we have the ability to do so, is I go and I download a sample of contact records. I go and download a sample of different records from all of their objects. And I go see, like you said, what is the relationship between them? Can the data link to them in a normalized type of fashion? How is this going to impact reporting? And fundamentally speaking, not just reporting, but also quality assurance in testing and implementation. And so that's one of my favorite things to do is to look at it from that object-oriented perspective and build the quality assurance based off of the relationships among them. So yeah, couldn't be more in agreement with you there. I think also too, as not just somebody who's worked with HubSpot, but as an executive of somebody who manages a service-based business, lead generation, everything else, it is just as important to manage the health of the platform as it is to manage the use of the platform. And I think that's a very good mindset for leaders and executives to tap into, especially when they are considering either capital expenses for HubSpot or whether they are
Fiscal
budgeting, roles and responsibilities, etc. The management of the health of HubSpot, I'm going to say, is almost more important than the usage of HubSpot. And I would argue that those should be in like a 70-30 or 30-70 split or a 40-60 split. You should be spending some healthy amount of time managing the platform itself, right? And I don't want to go too tangential here, but fundamentally, when you think about the data objects we talked about, everything else is built off of that, what you see in the interface, data you get in reporting, what's available to contacts who are getting emails with their sales emails or marketing emails.
Yep.
And also what's available in forms,
I think it's really important to kind of bring that to a head on what you just said, making sure that you're always keeping your business processes up to date and current is kind of the first part when you said like, hey, managing the platform. And then the second piece is, I would say, is just having consistent check-ins with the users of the system to make sure that they're using the system in a way that it needs to be used and it is in line with your business processes.
Yeah, and that is a very cheap and inexpensive way measured by time is what I'm talking about here, not just money. Yeah. It's a very cheap and inexpensive time perspective on how you can become familiar and acquainted with your HubSpot install.
Yeah, it's an insurance policy. What you could do is you could work with a HubSpot partner on a small retainer basis where you can say, hey, for $4,000 a month, which is $48,000 a year, what is that relative to a single person's salary? A third, a half? Like it's probably somewhere in there. And you could have an expert on staff who can maybe talk with your head of sales or your head of marketing and just make sure that everything's working the way it's supposed to, or they can go through the audit log in HubSpot and see who's been doing what and take a quick look at how those things were set up and configured to make sure the processes are being followed, or have some one-on-one coaching with the individuals. But it's a really great way to have an insurance policy at scale.
And not just also from the insurance, or not just from the insurance policy perspective, but also from an executive or platform owner perspective. If you're the person who is responsible for the success of your CRM or the success of HubSpot, it's really good and also time inexpensive to have check-ins with the key owners of each of those types of data or those objects of data in HubSpot. So if you have the head person in sales, or if you have a head person in marketing, or if you have a head person in IT, who are actively the users of the platform or who are ingesting the data on the platform from those objects, go see, hey, what's working? What's not working? Right. And literally just ask, what can we do better?
Right. Your data governance largely around the records that are in the system. You're talking about the objects, which are the structure of the records of each of the individual types of records. But for really what it comes down to is making sure that sales and marketing and customer success or customer service is the data meeting the standards that they need it to meet at the time they get access to it, or the time that
they have to use it.
Exactly. So then that's where we identify there might be some gaps. Like the ironic part of HubSpot in its name is hub, right? It is the hub of your data. And so there's a lot of things that are feeding that data, and it is easy for one of the sources of data that's bringing those records in the system to potentially have an issue or an error or an inconsistency with the way the data is coming in. Like today, we specifically found that HubSpot's mangling the Google Click IDs. So the reporting on the back end for Google Ads is jacked up.
Yeah, for those of you who don't know, HubSpot has this really great feature. And it essentially, if your form fails to submit and somebody has filled out all of your required fields, it will take that via the HubSpot cookie and create a contact record for you. But the issue, as it seems, is there's a bunch of hidden fields in there too as well, like a Google Click ID or a Facebook Click ID. These are unique identifiers that they use to track somebody who comes from an advertisement on one of those platforms.
Attribution.
And then HubSpot, one of the core features that it has is it can say, hey, we got a lead. This lead became a customer. It paid us so much money. And if that happens within a 90-day window on Google, it sends that data back to Google. So Google Ads knows, hey, count that as a conversion, even though it happened offline. Well, the issue is that ID is case sensitive, and HubSpot's tracking makes it all lowercase.
Yeah.
And so I just opened up a support ticket with them today. I figured this thing out at scale finally. I've always been figuring out why there had been a certain amount of records and numbers that weren't making it into Google Ads. And I had worked with a competitor to HubSpot, building out their exact solution for them, doing this exact same thing. And I had to debug the entire thing with them and their platform to get it to a certain accuracy rate. And
shout out, Alan.
Yeah, I figured I was able to help out HubSpot and help them get that one done.
Yeah, so it's little things like that can come up. And so just quality, consistent check-ins, monthly, bi-weekly, whatever, or whatever it needs to be at your org. It's just checking in with those key system users across your various teams, and you're just identifying like, hey, is anything falling off? It's just standard maintenance. It's no different than your car. You got brakes, you got tires. If you're driving an ICE engine, you got oil changes. It's no different. If you're going to use a CRM and you're going to pay quality money for it and you're going to get the value out of it, you also need to maintain it. It's an investment in your business. And if you don't keep evolving your processes or checking in and making sure things should be going the way you want them to go, you're going to end up with a mess over time.
And the best way that I have found to perform that maintenance over time is not just proactively with going out and talking to the people using the platform, because sometimes they don't even know that there's an issue.
Well,
the best way that I've found to do it is to have a solid understanding of what are your most important metrics within inside of HubSpot. So if we go back to the whole marketing, customer service, sales, we just focus on those core pieces. What are the most important metrics for those groups? And you should have custom reporting which monitors those metrics. And you should be able to see over time how those are trending and any sort of key drivers of them. What we have found at scale, especially with larger enterprise accounts, using this framework in this format, is there are cases and times when the primary contact for sales or marketing, et cetera, does not know that something is going wrong because it hasn't yet started to show such an ugly trend downward or upward that they're aware of it. They only become aware of it when it becomes such a problem across multiple instances and times. And so this reporting...
Usually what we see is when the reporting gets carried over and compared month against month, negative trends start showing. Somebody inspects why those trends are happening.
Correct.
Oh,
and so
record
we actually
problem.
build custom reporting outside of HubSpot. Depends on the size of your instance and your install. You can either do this in like Google Sheets. There's some tools you can automatically pull the data out of APIs, or in larger enterprise formats, that data can be ingested in a data warehouse. And again, some reporting, basic reporting like Tableau, Power BI, et cetera, any type of data visualization tool that sits on top of either of those and can trend out those KPIs over time. That's going to show you an immediately or a more immediate impact to those KPIs.
Yeah.
Now, give you an exact use case and example of when that was extremely helpful. Well, we noticed that with a specific enterprise client in the middle of getting acquired by a public company, that their time for each one of their contacts in each step of their sales cycle, the time had been going down and going down and going down and going down consistently across every single one of their sales stages. And it looked really, really good until I pointed out to them, hey, it's not normal to have every single one of your sales stages have it the amount of time each person is in that sales stage reduced without having an equivalent amount of reduction in the number of people going from your last stage to becoming a customer. And what happened is there was a workflow that was updated that used the incorrect field. And it was the field from the first stage of their sales funnel, and it was overriding every single stage beneath it. And so it was essentially, for a period of time, nullified the average amount of days it takes somebody to get from each stage to the next stage in their sales cycle, which, as you can imagine, for sales or some internal sales teams, is a pretty catastrophic happening event. We nixed it in about 3 weeks versus it taking about 3 to 4 months to figure out.
Yeah, I'm glad you gave that example. We see that all the time. Just we call them rogue workflows or RWs. When those RWs show up, somebody on a team, regardless of what that team is, was doing something to support their job function. But they did not account for the totality of the system because, remember, HubSpot's a CRM at its core, and then all your teams are working with the same data. Well, your workflows are modifying the data. So you modify the data for the marketing team and then get it the way the marketing team wants it. You might affect the sales teams and vice versa, or the customer success, customer service. I like to encourage, promote, and implement permission sets and have really safeguarded access to very specific features inside of HubSpot that correlates to imports and exports. I can't tell you how many times the marketing teams are like, we're going to bring these lists in. We bought this data set. They import all these records. Boom. They just screwed up their whole data.
Camera, switch to me. Switch to me, camera. Marketing teams, we love you. Curtis is just from the IT team. It's a little rough around the edges, but just like this table is nice and smooth, I'm going to sand them down for you.
It wasn't a knock on them. It's just that's just really the prime example we see when data comes into the system from imports. It's usually the marketing teams, and they're not looking through the records that are going to be created or affected by those imports. So that's one part we like to really control. The other part is access to the workflows and the ability to create the workflows, because those can have catastrophic effects like you just talked about, because it is manipulation of the data that everyone's going to use. So it needs to have fine-grained controls around what is the purpose of this workflow, what are the outcomes it needs to achieve, and what are the acceptance criteria that we need to take from a testing perspective to make sure this is not causing issues in other parts of the platform.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. So now as we talk about sort of getting HubSpot into routine operations, we talked about some strategies to manage it from a platform owner perspective. One of the items we didn't really touch on was sort of the platform administrator, the person who has the global access, who's controlling the data model. What are you recommending for how you should be governing changes to the data model, what we'll call very important workflows, things which ensure data governance? That is really what I have come across. This is a critical mass of usage maturity,
yes,
where a lot of organizations don't quite have that answer yet. So what are you working on with some of our enterprise clients right now addressing this problem?
So enterprise clients typically have sandbox accounts. And so what we're able to do is HubSpot's got a nice turnkey tool to bring over as much of your production account into those demo accounts on a consistent fashion as possible, so you can keep it up to date. And then we like to run testing out of those accounts. And so usually this follows we have a change approval board. So if you need to make a change, you go through a specific templatized process where you're defining, hey, like this is the need, this is what I want to do, this is why it's important. And then we assess that against, okay, so what's your acceptance criteria for making sure that this is not going to affect the rest of the system? We look at that against our business processes, understand how this change would need to be reflected in, say, updated documentation, or if we need to get necessary people on from various other teams, because it might mean that there's a downstream change in processes for somebody else. And so we shop the need and make sure that we get sign off and approval on the needs before we run through implementation. And then what we do thereafter is we're working in that demo account and as automated as a way as possible. So what I mean by this is if we can use the APIs or to add reconfigurations to the account, we want to do that, because that allows us to very quickly change the account and run the same update on the production account if the changes check out in the demo account. Or what we do is we might build out a solution. If we have to build out a solution, show everybody, get sign off, make sure it's working in the demo account, and then there will be a process for how that gets implemented inside of the new production account, because it could affect operations. Like it might have to happen after hours, or we might need to have a window where it's like, hey, this is coming. Just informing the teams of like the upcoming change. It's really just doing the necessary due diligence when you introduce a change like that and you have 10 plus people working in HubSpot. Like, people need to know that there's a change happening. It's no different than other parts of your operation.
Yeah. Well, I can't like necessarily dive in and give like specific clients or name clients or issues. I want to be very mindful of that. But the sandbox is definitely a great new, sort of recently new-ish feature that's come out too. Also, like you said, the change approval board, if they have some type of project management solutioning, customizing that to fit the CRM install or some type of ticketing center. All those things are definite strategies, but those are going to be more custom to a specific business. There are platforms outside of HubSpot, et cetera.
There's... You got your product owners and your product champions, and I alluded to this at the beginning of the podcast. If you're going to make a change like that, you're going to the product owners. This is the change we need to make. That's why I say, heavily restrict permissions and especially specific features in those permission sets. So the product owners are the ones who have the ability to implement those features. So, if you get something past them and they made a mistake, like, that's just an issue. But it stops the individuals from going and just making ad hoc changes without having full platform understanding.
Makes perfect sense.
And then your product champions, really, those are the people that are really kind of having a say of like, these are the new features that are coming in. Here's the next ways we can get more ROI out of the platform with the feature sets we're already paying for. They're kind of on the forefront, bleeding edge of what you should be doing next in the account to do process development or feature development, or how you guys can implement like a full-blown revenue operations implementation, just getting more value out of the platform.
Yeah, makes perfect sense. Let's talk about planning for the future. We'll sort of wrap up here on this segment. Planning for the future with HubSpot. I think, based off my experience, HubSpot has one of the best marketing automation platforms out there. There are some ones that are more enterprise, like a Marketo, et cetera, that they tout it that way. But I think from usability and practicality, HubSpot's starting to encroach and corner that market. So planning from a future perspective, if you were looking to HubSpot to be the marketing arm of your business, have you seen HubSpot deployed either with any other CRMs like a Salesforce, or have you seen really just total buy-in with HubSpot as businesses are really looking to the future and what comes next for their business?
Yeah, I've seen typically what we see is Salesforce and HubSpot installs connected together. So you'll see your marketing teams running out of HubSpot, and you'll see your customer success and sales teams running out of Salesforce. I'm in a big enterprise project doing that right now. There's connectivity between the data and the system. There's a native connector to either do one-way directional sync of the data or bidirectional sync of the data based on specific actions that are taken against the records in each system. And then really what you're doing is you're relying on the power of one platform for a specific use case, and then relying on the power of another platform for another specific use case. So HubSpot really does seem to be the leader in the marketing space. When we see people connect Salesforce and HubSpot, they're using HubSpot for the marketing automation capabilities. I have seen other vendors, like they have homegrown CRMs, very specific niche businesses, right? They built their own software over the years. They connect that to HubSpot, and they use it again, marketing automation. Really, where we see businesses that are thriving the most is when they go all in on HubSpot, because HubSpot fits their operational use cases. Right? You got to know, Salesforce is account oriented, HubSpot's individually oriented, so around the contact and around the account. You can make HubSpot work for account-based setups, but really it's structured around the context. So you have to know the platform well enough for how to set it up. And we do that all the time for clients, but Salesforce is, all around the account. So that's really the trade-off between the two.
Nice. Planning for a future perspective though, when do you decide to go all in on HubSpot? What makes HubSpot an all-in candidate?
That's a good question. I'm going to say when we see a lot of SaaS companies in HubSpot, when you have a specific industry or vertical that you're working in, when you could be oriented to the individual, or you need an account-based structure, but the limitations of doing account-based in HubSpot are not limiting to you, then that's usually when we're seeing orgs go there. To be honest, it's like a 6-4 split. So out of every 10, 6 Salesforce, 4 HubSpot. It's a lot of preference. There's a lot of similarities. HubSpot's a little bit of a deeper platform in terms of feature set for sure. But we see, I'm a Salesforce user. I've used HubSpot, or Salesforce is too complicated, or, everything in HubSpot looks the same. And they're just different flavors of really
Preference.
Yeah. Exactly. Preference or the same thing.
Now, you
to the
think
varying
HubSpot
degree.
has more features, or did you mean that Salesforce has more features?
Salesforce definitely has more features.
Okay, I'm sorry. Yeah, earlier you said HubSpot has more features. I just wanted to clarify that.
My mistake.
Because I've done architecture and implementation with both, and I was about to say, yeah, Salesforce can be extremely overwhelming, but I could also understand how equivalently HubSpot is confusing because everything looks the same.
It all looks the same. So these are the trade-offs in the platform. So when you talk about, I'm a software architect. And a solutions architect is how I, got into the solution side for platforms. When you look at the way, let's just take like Zoho, Salesforce, and HubSpot. HubSpot started as a marketing automation platform, and I think it was like 2014 or 15. They're like, hey, we're going to be a CRM with a marketing automation platform. Well, that fundamental shift in the way they think guided them to being a CRM where they have various hubs. Hubs are just a correlation of the features.
And right now, they're really becoming a CDP. They're becoming a customer data platform.
So when you look at the way HubSpot's set up in the UI, it all blends together, right? That was
100%.
That was by design. When you look at Salesforce, all of the various parts of their ecosystem, it was all purpose built, but
Salesforce was always built as a CRM first.
And they had some very strategic purchases of other companies that they integrated in with the platform. So when you talk about that, there are potential problems with the interactivity between those systems because, you're acquiring one business and you're integrating it in with Salesforce, but maybe it was never considered to be integrated in with Salesforce.
Yeah, the data model has to change.
You got some technical debt for how to get that set up. And then you have something like Zoho, which was self-funded by the guys that made Zoho, but they were making very specific business applications. Well, those suite of applications, they were all kind of running independently, but because they controlled everything, they have like this integration plane underneath the hood to make the systems communicate and work together. So when you really look at how these systems have been built over time, it really strongly suggests the problems users have in those systems, because that's largely the technical debt of the system and the limitation of the systems. So that provides a nice corollary to why you said, HubSpot users, everything just blends together. Well, that was by design, but potentially it's also downfall because people don't even know. They're like, does this go to this one hub? Does it go to this one hub? Am I paying for this? Do I have this feature? Like, that's commonly what we see in HubSpot, where in Salesforce,
versus it's an add-on.
Yeah. Like, oh, you don't have this.
You can't even access it.
Exactly.
Right. Yeah. It makes perfect sense. Yeah. I've experienced both of those, right? The last like large architecture I did with Salesforce was when Lightning was coming out, and that was definitely one of those cases too. And that was where I think Datarama.
You just dated yourself 5 years.
5 years.
Yeah.
Was in Salesforce. I mean, I've done other work with Salesforce, but nothing like quite like very large enterprise like that account. That was pretty much my same experience too.
Yeah, I mean, I've had CRM experience I've worked with Agile, which is a small one, Copper, which is native G workspaces, Sugar, which is, open source. And then there's, Salesforce, and then HubSpot, and then Zoho, a little bit of Monday, but there's a variety of CRMs out there, and there's even industry specific CRMs.
Somebody's interested in wanting to talk HubSpot. Where can you get in touch with you?
So 3ventures.com/HubSpot-consulting, or if you just go to 3ventures.com and fill out the contact form, that's a way. You can connect with me on LinkedIn if you'd like. I'm just Curtis Morty. I have a pretty unique name. You'll find me. It's a nice picture of my face. If you see me here on the podcast, you could connect the dots there.
And that's CURTIS
MORTE.
Okay.
Yes.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. We hope you have a great rest of your day, and we'll catch you next time.